Today's episode is brought to you by Brick, a literary journal. Each issue is as purposely crafted as a good novel, says John Irving. Juan Gabriel Vasquez calls Brick an indispensable feature of my personal landscape and a place I visit to renew my pact with the written word. Christina Sharp declares Brick a wonder. An international literary magazine based in Toronto, Brick is beloved by writers and readers the world over. The masthead of each issue hosts these words from Rainer Maria Rilke, as translated by E. E. Cummings. Works of art are of an infinite loneliness, and with nothing to be so little reached as with criticism. Only love can grasp and hold and fairly judge them. It's this love that drives Brick to publish the most invigorating and challenging essays, interviews, translations, poems, and boundary-pushing fiction. Brick's winter issue will be out soon, featuring Lydia Davis, Cristina Rivera Garza, Madeleine Tien, Solveig Balla, Ronaldo Walcott, Diane Seuss, and many more. Visit brickmag.com to subscribe to the magazine or gift a subscription this holiday season. Print subscribers get free access to Brick's complete digital archive, with issues spanning nearly 50 years. As a bonus for Between the Covers podcast listeners, take $5 off any subscription with coupon code Between the Covers. Ever since Caren Beilin first appeared on the show in the spring of 2022 to talk about Revenge of the Scapegoat, we haven't just kept in touch. We've become friends, writing long correspondences to each other about everything, whether dismaying, exciting, or otherwise in our lives. So when she told me that Kevin Samsel wanted her to come to Powell's for a live event for her latest book, Sea Poison, I didn't only say yes to being in conversation with her, but also said, if she wanted, she could crash at our place. Her staying for a long weekend did, however, produce some anticipatory anxiety, as we'd never met in person. Sometimes what works in the epistolary at a distance mode doesn't hold up to the embodied experience in the same room, sharing and moving within the same space. And there's no worse feeling than discovering that in real time. This anxiety entered our correspondence, at first obliquely, Caren mentioning past bad guest experiences she'd had, or wondering what I cook. But then it took on its own life, me sharing the trailer to the Korean monster movie The Host, with a river creature surfacing and causing havoc in the city, and Caren identifying herself with this creature. Caren, the creature, coming my way. Then me wondering whether she had read Banu Kapil's book, How to Wash a Heart, which is largely about this guest-host dynamic and has the lines, "It's exhausting to be a guest in somebody else's house forever, even though the host invites the guest to say whatever it is they want to say. The guest knows that host logic is variable. Prick me and I will cut off the energy to your life." So we had conjured together the rotten potential of it all. So given that it did in the end go haywire, and Caren asked me not to air this today, and I'm airing it nonetheless, it all seems of a piece, a part of an uncanny whole. But seriously, we did actually have a great time together. It not only confirmed our connection, it deepened our complicity, I think. You'll even hear Caren asking a question to Stephen Hayes in the last episode of the show, since I was interviewing him on Saturday morning at an art gallery, and then Caren the next night at Powell's Bookstore. But other than watching with a strange mixture of distress and admiration at Caren's deep tissue massage technique on our gorgeously antisocial cat, Zora, a technique that Zora mystifyingly and impressively submitted to. One of the great things about her stay was how she troubled the guest host dynamic. not simply deferring to her host's suggestions. One night, we had suggested that perhaps we could go see Frankenstein, and while Caren did watch the trailer and didn't say no, she ultimately said, "You know, what I'd really like is to find a good martini and some fries." And we ended up at a bar nearby that we had never been to before, even though it was in our neighborhood. And similarly, the next day, she says, "Let's find some golden milk or turmeric milk." And we end up wandering the neighborhood until we finally end up at a cafe I hadn't been to in 30 years and which really hadn't changed since. It was kind of like we were seeing our city anew, moving through it also in a new way. And I think perhaps these experiences suggest something about what it's like to read Caren too. You might feel forcibly immobilized by her firm hands, and yet something new will be set loose inside this constraint, inside of you as you submit. A journey might begin within as you hold her book before you, seemingly stationary to all those watching you, but with your familiar world now reflected back to you anew, now strange, now scary, now ridiculous, now shimmering. Enjoy today's conversation with Caren Beilin. Hello, Caren Beilin.
Hi, David Naiman.
Well, I thought maybe a good place to start, given that I imagine not everybody in the audience probably knows what the word Oulipo means, and given that Oulipo is not only a big part of the plot and moving the story forward, but also very deeply affects the syntax and the sentences. Tell us your relationship to Oulipo, how you would talk to somebody who'd never heard the word before, what Oulipo is, and your attraction to it.
Well, Oulipo stands for Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, and was sort of a literary group or movement formed in the 60s by some French men. And it's a practice of constraints. So it's about sometimes very impossible seeming constraints that you put your literature under the condition or spell of, and you make it very hard for yourself to write or to use language. And it helps you, in my opinion, explore the infinity of expression and to see and make things that are new. So I use constraints very frequently in my writing, and I'm very, very inspired by some of the Oulipians. Georges Perec really figures in this book, and there's a chapter in my book that also does not use the letter E, which was what Georges Perec kind of famously did in one of his books. And I think on a larger scale, and something this book really talks about, is constraint in a more thematic way, just the ways that we are doing things, whether it's writing or living or being, and all kinds of things, under amazing constraints, which I'm sure everybody here can think about the constraints in their life, whatever it is, the constraint of the memory that you have every day that you have to think about, the constraint of something that you live your life without, the constraint of loss, thinking today about the constraint of being under enormous state violence, things like that. And Oulipo is a practice of really obstinate and creative resilience. So I think this book kind of thinks about constraints very playfully and using them to write, but also about the kinds of Oulipo that we live with we just live with like the things that make it impossible. So
Well, let's spend another moment with it in terms of what I think is a paradox about Oulipo, but also the fact that it's put forth as something, as a constraint, but also something that is about liberation. And I have to mention someone in the audience, John Beer. So like my second class in my MFA was co-taught by John and Lainey Zumas, called Writing in the Box. And it was like finding who you are by looking outside of yourself is one way I think you could frame it. The entire trajectory of my writing life was sort of shaped by what I discovered about myself by using something that wasn't from me, and then discovering a voice coming back to me that was my own in a strange way. So here's some quotes. So Raymond Queneau, one of the Oulipians, says, "Inspiration, which consists in blind obedience to every impulse, is in reality a sort of slavery." And George Perec says, "In the service of a self-imposed rule may be perfect freedom." And then Caren Beilin says, "Effacing one's own style only brings you closer to it." So I wondered if you could extend this moment around this mystery, I guess, around maybe selfhood or voice and constraint and liberation or discovery.
yeah, I mean, I guess I think we're automatons. I think one of the jokes about what's going on now with teaching, I mean, I'm a teacher, around AI being really a hard thing, like because the students are using it all of the time. Like one of the jokes in my mind about it is that everybody's like was an automaton before AI too. Like it's hard to like accuse a student of sounding automatic when like before AI they've all been trained to sound automatic anyway. Like we've all like have these automatic ways of writing and thinking or saying anything, which is, you know, I'm really just paraphrasing Victor Shklovsky and like his well-known essay Art as Technique and thinking about things like defamiliarization. But it's really presumptuous to think that you could get out of that without some sort of tool or support or machine or mechanism. And I think that is like this sort of presumption of like selfhood, that you could like be this like sui generis, interesting, inventive person. Like you need something to be against the self to get you out of it, I think. One of the things I do to my students to just purely torture them and upset them and maybe make them consider not taking my class is like as a first course of business, I'll say, write a biography of yourself to introduce yourself to the class. And you just can't use any of your initials. And so the students kind of immediately get like fucked by their own name, like especially if they have a name that has like particularly unfortunate initials, like I don't know, like an E in it or something, like an Edward Albee. Yeah, that would be hard. So they're immediately like, oh, like the curse of what my name allows me not to do or say about myself. And I think that's a good figure, like, yeah, walking around under that sort of, maybe I would say an expectation of yourself might be exactly the space where you would sound the most like anybody else. Yeah.
So Sea Poison opens with Caren Beilin, who has rheumatoid arthritis and needs to get an eye exam because the medication they're considering to use for the autoimmune condition might harm her eyes, her ability to see color. So she ends up needing to get a laser eye surgery. And she believes that something bad happened in the procedure where the laser touches her brain and changes her relationship to the way she writes or to language, to the point where she's blaming the laser surgery on her writer's block. And suddenly she has these very utilitarian, linear syntax sentences. So it's sort of like a medical Oulipo writing block crisis. And there's also this meditation or this moment where she's commenting on this real life event where this French writer, Marie Ndaye, accuses another French writer, Marie Darrieussecq, of stealing her plot or story structure. And Cumin believes that you can't steal, like you're not stealing something of another person when you steal their story or their plot. You steal something if you're stealing the way they write sentences. So the implication, I think, that something has been stolen about Cumin's selfhood in the way that her relationship to language has changed. And I guess I wanted to start there around your relationship to concision. I think she speaks now in a concise way. And I get the sense, having read your other books and our other conversation on the podcast, that this is a polar opposite to sort of the maximalist excess of your own syntax. So I would love to hear your thoughts on both concision and syntax. And also if you have anything to say about maybe voice or self lying somewhere in language that isn't about story.
Yeah, the sticks of Marie Darrieussecq's syntax are not the same as the sticks of Marie Ndaye's syntax. So how could plagiarism have occurred? You can't take somebody else's sticks, I don't think, is the argument of Caren Beilin, but I don't know her. But I think for me, syntax is something that I search for as a writer. I try to find a syntax that is like the rhythm or the song or the way of a sentence that allows me to keep writing. And that is the thing that really drives me to write a new book, I think. Like if I have to find that syntax. Yeah. So I'm not really a plot person. My plots are all really stolen. In fact, a lot of the plots in this book are kind of maybe stolen from the movies that they're talking about, or the plots don't really stick, I think. I think that was this big challenge with this book because I was really interested in writing a novel about OBGYN crime. That was the goal of this book. I kept seeing in the news Larry Nassar, George Tyndall at USC, Mark Haddon at Columbia, Mahendra Amin in the ICE facility in Georgia, Javed Pervez in Maryland, OBGYNs who have been committing crimes for over 30 years, so many crimes and so many institutions and nurses and aides and administrators and Olympic committees all supporting these crimes, the FBI supporting these crimes, medical boards supporting these crimes. And I wrote an incredibly sober, moral novel about these crimes, detailing the crimes, particularly of Javed Pervez, who is now in prison, detailing what he did to the women. I watched a 10-part documentary series and I detailed those crimes. I was like, I am a witness. And I gave that novel to an agent who was not interested. But he did give me helpful advice, which was, your voice isn't in this. And he was correct. I was like really interested in like effacing my voice to like detail these crimes. And it was such a sober, like upset novel. And it was also like, I think maybe a problematic novel because I was just like recommitting the crimes in literature. Like I was just like doing it again. So it's like everything about this novel does have to change. Like he was really right. That was like a helpful thing he said to me. And the thing that corrupted it was voice. Like that's the thing that absolutely was the destroyer and the helper and the thing that made the novel And I guess, that's different for everybody. I think voice is so hard to talk about. It's like talking about tone, or like it's really hard to say what it is. But I guess for me, there are some different principles that just make me feel like I'm speaking in the world. Self-deprecation is a really big part of it. I think horniness is a really big part of it. Like a lot of times I find my voice by just like discussing desire a lot. That sort of being on the street in the city in an outfit, being kind of pathetic but proud. I don't know, there's just a certain little angle that I am at the world for my reasons. And I just sort of started putting that voice in. And then I guess we talked about this in our last conversation, and it's so important to me. I think I just like to write novels that kind of have that voice, and then also have like a real interest in describing materials, like describing the moon and describing what the bricks look like, and just getting really like shivery and lusty around the things that you look at, and feeling just like seized by things, by materials, and that sensation of being alive. So those are like, maybe that's like some components of my voice, but self-deprecation is probably a really big part of that. And that's when things could go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think what's tough about having conversations about really funny novels that are dealing with really serious things is it's hard to convey how funny the novel is when you're just having a conversation. But the first thing I think you encounter in like your signature in a lot of your books is sort of pain and shame metabolized into humor. At least that's the way I would put it. And also this sort of feral eros, the comedy of bodies, the disobedience of bodies and sexual arousal is part of it. But also there's such a distinct syntax in all of your writing, such an identifiably used syntax that's very strange, that it feels even in your first fictional books that aren't autofictional, they almost feel like they're autofictional because I can't not conflate you with this like overwhelming sense of personality coming off of the page. So I want to ask you about autofiction. Your last two books are more, I think, playing explicitly with autofiction. I mean, obviously, Caren Beilin, and you're inviting us into some sort of dance with you, the writer, and this character. I'm going to read something you said about autofiction in an interview because it's very different than what I would have imagined a reason why someone would use autofiction. It almost feels like you're using autofiction against autofiction in some way. So I'm going to read this and then I want to hear your thoughts. Before I started writing autofiction more explicitly, I was used to people conflating my characters with me all the time, sometimes uncomfortably. I felt affronted, actually. These days, I'm inclined to use autofiction as a lure. There's something so loud and obvious and even obnoxious about this form, and of course, very intriguing on a base gossip level. It draws someone in, this little shaking treat of potential nonfiction. The important thing about autofiction to me is that it's not a sincere form. So there is autofiction that's sincere, I think, or perhaps, but talk to us about why it's important for you that the autofiction isn't sincere and what that means, and then also just simply unpack a little bit of what I quoted back to you.
Yeah, I think I am just like very skeptical of selfhood, individualism, writing characters. I'm skeptical of protagonism. I've been such a proponent of a friend of mine, Simone Koklov's wonderful magazine, Lean Magazine, which is a magazine devoted to non-protagonist-centered fiction. And that's been something very inspiring to me in recent years. But I think there's something really like important to his kind of manifesto thinking about that in terms of, well, whatever. I mean, we can't center ourselves. Like, it's not going well, It really isn't. And it feels uncomfortable to me to think the world through one person when there are so many other people and there are so many other animals and so many other materials. And I mean, I'm addicted to the eye, though. I totally am. And I want to use the eye. It's such a good drug. Oh my, I love it. It's such a good drug. I can't imagine writing without the eye. But I guess one way that I like deal with my disgust for protagonism is like autofiction, because it's ridiculous and you don't really have to do any character building. Like there's something so sincere about a fiction writer who's like creating a person. Like there's something so like, it's like valiantly nerdy, really. They're just like, oh, like, yeah, like this is who they are, and these are like their beliefs, and this is what they think about this, and this is how they were raised, these are their traumas. You know, you get like, oh, I'm fleshing out this person. And I've just never been that kind of writer. Like I don't have that kind of energy. I'm like already tired. Like, isn't there another person to, like, I don't know. Like you're like at a party, you're like, can I move on? Like, can I go around the room a little bit? But then what you're really sick of at a party, you're so sick of talking to people, you want to talk to somebody else, everybody's boring you, you're sick of yourself. You're so sick of yourself. And I'm definitely sick of myself, but that is funny because like all this autofiction. But I think that autofiction actually for me has become a form that is like so drained of import. Like it's such a joke. Like who cares about me? And I don't have to do any character building. Like you could just like go to my website and see my bio, or just like read the back of the book, or be like, whatever, like who cares? Like it doesn't matter. And there's nothing, I'm not valiantly making anybody or saying valiantly, this is the person to follow or to like care about. So I think I just find it very like effacing of the self. I find it to be a joke, but I don't think that's, there's a lot of autofiction that's not doing that. But autofiction at this point has become very baggy. I mean, I think people use it now to like just get out of a legal jam. Like there's many reasons to do it. But I find it to be really self-deprecating, kind of ironically.
Well, maybe now's a good time for a first reading.
Ooh, okay. Oh, this is really perfect because you were talking about this like desire stuff. And I find it very funny, like part of the plot in this book is that Cumin has such a crush on this guy, Alex. He spells his name with like an I, like it's like Alex with an I, like that's so hot. Even when she's like in the middle of like learning about like this like total conspiracy against her and like this really problematic medical like conspiracy, even when she's like in the middle of learning that, she's like interrupting it because she's just trying to hit on this guy. And I just think desire is like very important. In fact, I was just watching this YouTube video of an interview Sinead O'Connor was doing in '93, I think, with Arsenio Hall. And they're talking about the Middle East, and she's being very, that person of conscience that she was. And she's being so wonderful and really trying to witness the world very seriously. And she's also hitting on Arsenio Hall so hard and like inviting him to a spanking session and like talking about how gorgeous he is in his leather coat. And like, I just think we need to be that way. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to read just the beginning of this section that's like, this is a Philadelphia novel. So this is a chapter called Fresh Prince. And, at this point in the novel, this is like midway through, Cumin has this brain injury that she doesn't really understand, and she's dealing with it and just trying. So, she's like trying to figure that out. Mushrooms were growing in my 39th year in the burnt area behind my eye. I tried to think about it. Mushrooms grow on burnt pieces of the forest floor. Okay, what is different about brain and forest? I don't know anything. I am not aware of anything about the brain or oil. How is there oil? Where? Do you have to pressure the olive or put undue pressure on an avocado? Is there oil inside of mango? Is oil anything you press or pressure? Can a pressure cooker make oil? Can you put a hand in a pressure cooker? Can you pressure me into an oil? Can the brain be squeezed or used very much by me? I don't know. I didn't know if a brain in the way of a forest or a toenail can grow its own mushrooms. Is it itself? Is it in the skull, but with the one road out? Is that the neck? Can't you mess with someone's head, though, through their gut? Or, I don't know, by raping them? Aren't brain cells in the gut? I thought I'd read this. Can mushrooms grow in your head if it is burnt? Are brains and bodies interchangeable is a question. It's my question. But are brains and forests on a spectrum? Can a forest have a reflex if you bang a hammer on a wild turkey in it? Can it try in its trees to learn French late in life? Je ne sais. I was tripping. That's what it seemed. I was tripping without ingesting mushrooms from the outside. People's dogs had extra geometries, even saliva spilling on my hand when I greeted dogs or when they came sniffing up to me at the cafe. I was there on Saturdays. Had that nature of hard rhinestones studding my knuckles in a summer so hot, so mango-legionous, I sometimes thought I was peeing, but it was my sweat, it was my Swarovski body being pressed and popped out of my porous, I think, are we? Skin as I walked around South Philly, treeless, in my same striped dress without anything at this time underneath it. A loose relationship with even your underpants signals to me a momentous time. Your underpants in a momentous time have something of their own instinctive life, not always clinging about. Your underpants become sentient and independent some summers. And my heart, I don't know how else to say. It was a water bottle of fizzy booze lying in meadows of stinging sinew in the black air, packed like black eels, like sardines in a dawning tin. Oh, I was still crushing on Alex. And lately, I've been taking my underwear off about it. Is it okay to be this horny? I was walking around thinking of Alex all of the time and his BDE. I was almost squeezing, holding, kissing, and loving anything I touched. The couch, certainly Marin's old theater leopard in my new pseudo room with my printer roommate, though it smelled bad. Even the printer got my loving touch. And I looked at the cracks in the sidewalk and street and thought about jamming my actual clit into them like a fin searching to surface in the inverse, getting off. I hoped it would, on the jagged way a crack acts. I wanted a crack in a sidewalk, basically, to use its crackling edges to stimulate me. I'm trying to say that I was looking with lust and erotic admiration at the sidewalk and at anything. I thought about Alex and how much I wanted his cock inside of me, including my blood cells and immune system, which had been suppressed by the drug Rinvoq into keen submission and was ready for his domination. But in fact, he'd never called me after the night in the basement. I texted. In the middle of the night, I was going crazy, rolling around in bed and making myself come on a wearing loop. I had few means of expression. I thought about writing and about that maxim about writing, about you need to fire a gun in the third act. And I thought, come on, if this is a novel and there's a character introduced who has a hotness condition of BDE, doesn't his big dick have to be exposed and explode down the line? Don't I get it? I texted Alex a lot, my short, stalled sentences. I like you. Do you want to take a walk? Can we talk? I had the dog saliva of summer all over my fingers, and I made myself come over and over with them as they bent and sprang with ease like a true Pavlovian who's made to come every time I think of that certain person with his big bell energy. Shit, that's all. It was a predicament. Underwear, get out. I killed a succulent on accident. I'll end there.
It's sort of hard to continue after that. Okay, so probably my favorite of your books, other than Sea Poison, is Blackfishing the IUD. And I think you could see them as this really interesting sort of mirroring pair. Blackfishing the IUD is your only nonfiction book. It's about the copper IUD, partly your story of rheumatoid arthritis triggered by a reaction to the copper IUD, but then looking at the history of medicine, the history of this intervention, but also in a nonfiction book, bringing in a lot of fiction. So there's looking at different stories and literature that are brought into Blackfishing the IUD. And in a way, this book is sort of the inverse in the sense, obviously we're in a fictional world, and a lot of people use the word bonkers for this book. And I think the tone, like there's a lot of horror in this book too, and it's all sort of filtered through this bonkers reality. But at the core of it is something I think really real and painful, but also the source of a lot of comedy in the book, is she believes that she's been harmed, and she may very well have been harmed by this procedure. So she seeks a second opinion and a second framing for what to do next and whether she had been harmed. But then other people in her life are asking an appropriate question: how do you know that the second opinion is correct? I mean, just because it's the second opinion or the most recent opinion, it's possible that the first people were really doing the correct thing. And so there's this difficulty of how to get outside of the system to judge the system when you're in it. But there's also this way in which, kind of like what we just heard of Caren reading, this sort of maximalism, there's a way in which she surrounds herself with these really intense stories of medical crime. And they include immigrants who are given hysterectomies without consent in ICE facilities. They include OBGYNs raping pregnant women under anesthesia. They include all sorts of stories. And in the context of this book, where she's full of all of these fears and desires, it's easy to sort of think it's confirmation bias. She's just pulling all of this insanity and creating this narrative that she's being harmed. But if you go outside of the book into the non-fictional world, all of these things really happened. So I think at the core of this is this question of gaslighting and also gender in medicine. But this is true with also your nonfiction book. So I guess maybe let's spend a moment with how you see the role of nonfiction in Sea Poison in this regard, and then how you saw the role of fiction in Blackfishing the IUD in terms of engaging with this question of real potential medical harm.
Okay. This is all right. I'm going to try my best to unpack some things. I mean, maybe the first thing to say is that I wrote Blackfishing the IUD because I got a copper IUD implanted and had like a major medical crisis as a result. And I believe that possibly the inflammatory response my body had to the device and or the copper toxicity associated with that device created a local to systemic response that triggered for me a latent autoimmunity. That's my theory. Blackfishing the IUD was about that theory and about the kind of activist world of other patients who had their theories, but people share negativity about this device. It is hard to share that negativity in an environment where people are constantly celebrating this as an incredibly successful medical device. So paranoia comes in as a question of it being a helpful paranoia or a delusional paranoia, or, you know, you're just paranoid, whatever it is, which is a kind of gaslighting thing to say. There's a lot of connecting the dots when you're in pain and being, hurt by something. The kind of panic of that paranoia, the panicked dot connecting that you do becomes a very frenzied kind of paranoid motion, but that doesn't mean that paranoia is always incorrect. The medical system is a very fraught space, and I'm sure we're all sitting here in this room knowing that for our different reasons. Something that I say in the book is that the for-profit nature of our medical system renders the Hippocratic Oath its opposite, and I believe that it does. It is difficult to be a patient navigating help and care when that's something that you might know. And that doesn't mean that help and care don't exist, which is an amazing thing to hold. And Cumin holds that. She is an autoimmune patient in that book who was incredibly helped by a wonderful doctor based on my own wonderful rheumatologist who has helped me. And she says there, even in the midst of a novel about many injustices in the medical system, something incredibly helpful could be going on. And that is very true. But as far as, the nonfiction in Sea Poison, it's certainly based on, like these nonfiction events. And in like a lot of my novels, there's a sort of documentary component. There's a chapter near the end that is, I think, quite, full of some horrible stuff that is not a recording of a conversation with my mom, but a story of a conversation with my mom that I told in collaboration with my mom, who wanted me to bring that story into the book and helped me to bring it into the book. And that is a documentary of her experience in the medical system. I did a lot of listening to patients' testimony, reading patient testimony around these crimes. There is some quotes, particularly from Allie Raisman and her testimony against Larry Nassar, her victim statement, because I was so touched by people who were standing up and talking about that. And I wanted their testimony to last forever. And books are, our dream is a book is a forever space. So I wanted to put it into forever space more so in all the ways that it could be. So like kind of a documentary impulse. And then with Blackfishing, I use different kind of fiction. I read fictional things to think about the potential of what had happened, what kind of harm had happened in a very nonfiction way to me and other patients. And I think that came from that desperation. It was an act of desperation because there wasn't enough nonfiction to help us understand it. And so I was like going to strange sources. Like at the time I had felt that like stranger sources than medical sources were helping me to understand, like Deleuze and Guattari have like things to say about metal that like made me feel like I understood something about the copper IUD. Like I was like going beyond the pamphlets being given to me by my OBGYN. That takes a paranoid upsettedness to like start rifling through the papers, right? Yeah.
Before I ask you something else about gaslighting and narrative, the last time we talked about you using constraints in life that make it hard to write as a site of writing. So, for instance, having to go to medical appointments all the time can become a material for writing. And like in this book, I don't know if this is happening in this book, but it feels like it, like places that we would normally think of like as filler activities in our life, people getting their blood drawn or waiting in a waiting room or like switching insurance and having to change their doctors. These are all in there in detail in this book, but they become somehow sites of humor or sites of insight or sites of drama in some way, even though we might experience them as none of those things in real life. And I wondered if that sparks anything for you around taking constraints, like you're talking about constraints in the world, and somehow flipping that into an asset around how to find material.
Yeah. Sea Poison opens with a scene of Cumin going to this eye appointment to get what she thinks is going to be a simple eye test so she can start a drug for her autoimmune condition. She thinks it's going to be simple. And she ends up almost feeling like she's been abducted by the eye clinic. she leaves 8 hours later, hungry and freezing in the night. Her cell phone has been completely drained, and she's just like, where was I for this long? And there's just something to be said about expressing like medical time and what medical time is like. And my experience as a person and a patient is that people are constantly telling me, oh, this will take just a second, or just call them and get this, or, oh yeah, they should have that for you, or, whatever. Oh, you just need this one test. And it's no, you're entering medical time. It's a different time and space. So I like depicting that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I made a connection with gaslighting and some of the formal decisions you make that I have no idea if this is going to strike you as true. So I'm just going to put it forth. But when I think about gaslighting, like one of the questions is, how do you know when your feet are on solid ground? Like there's always this sense of like, are you seeing it from the right vantage point? And how do you find a way to judge that you're outside or inside of the narrative that you think is trapping you? And it feels like there's this interesting way in which the book does that formally also. Like this isn't true just about sea poison, but I feel like the artifice of the book and the making of the book and the construction of the book is visible as part of the reading experience of the book. So in that way, you're making us aware of how this is all like artifice, that you've constructed something. We have a main character who's you and not you. Each chapter is named after a different medicine she's trying, and we're sort of under the aura of her trying that medicine. But there's also sort of like a maximalist referentiality that's referencing things outside of the book. So for one, she's sitting in the waiting room, she's reading a Teju Cole book that also is an autofiction. So we have this sort of rabbit's hole. But there's all these references to films, books, and scenes within scenes that sort of put Kuman inside and outside of the narrative. But you don't just rest at that. For instance, the thing that I thought was one of the greatest moments in the book was like, she wants to recount a scene from The Exorcist. And so then in the parenthetical, she says, like breaking the fourth wall, it feels like, okay, hold on a second, I'm going to look up that scene on YouTube. And then she's apparently looking up the scene on YouTube, and then she starts telling us the scene. So we're like in this weird interstitial space. And then there are these lines like, she really talked like this, like from a script, or it sounded like we were in a movie. And so whether that has to do with gaslighting, talk to us about this element of maybe nested references, which in a way it's like, where are we? Which feels like gaslighting. Like, where are we? Are we in the Are we in the parenthetical? Or are we in the moment in the room?
Yeah. There's a kind of magic about the reference, and it has to do with maybe paranoia or panic or inspiration, but when you're on something, everything seems like it's talking to you about that thing. Everything does. It doesn't matter what it is. It gets absorbed by the thing that you know and that you see. And I love that about reference. I think I use references like that in Sea Poison. Like you bring up The Exorcist, so this is something that kind of comes back, just storytelling around that movie. That's one of the films that gets talked about. And of course, there's a wonderful scene where Reagan, to the doctor, keep your goddamn fingers away from my cunt, do you remember? I'm thinking about OBGYNs and their assault of patients, their assault of people who have come to them, their assault of pregnant patients and the institutions that shamelessly supported them. So when I hear Reagan go, keep your goddamn fingers away from my cunt, I think about women who are raped by Robert Haddon. I think about that stuff, and it all starts to be part of that. That's paranoia. That's, I'm on a tear, like everything. There's another scene in this book where they're at an oyster bar in Atlantic City and there's a piano player, and the piano player is singing and playing, he's playing an Alanis Morissette song, and the whole bar starts singing it together at the same time, because the joke that you laid in the bed, that was me, and I'm not going to fade as soon as you close your eyes, and you know it. I'm thinking about the victims of Robert Haddon. You made a joke of me in that OBGYN room. So everything gets absorbed by my rage, by our rage. Everything becomes about it. And then, of course, the opposite happens, that everything helps us go somewhere else, too. Everything is like also part of like the mercy of the world, and like singing Alanis Morissette is also not about that. So we're let out, too, you know.
Well, to return to the assertion at the beginning that maybe our self or our personality or our voice resides in the music of a sentence or the syntax of a sentence and not in the story, to contradict that or to make it more mysterious even than it already is, this book began as a line-by-line syntactical copy of another book called The Sea and the Poison, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so what the hell? Like, talk to us about a book where there feels like there's an assertion that, you know, the way that you write, the voice and the energy and the music is the person, and yet you borrowed that from another person also, at least originally. So what is left? Why did you do that? Why did you do that with that book in particular? And then how much of that, if any of it, is still in the book?
Sure. So I said that my first draft was this like sober, moral like situation. That was that draft. And I used Shusaku Endo's book, The Sea and Poison, which I think is a very brilliant and amazing novel. And that is a novel that is witnessing human vivisections in World War II Japan and going into the crimes of those doctors and detailing what they did to like the 8 POWs in World War II in Japan. And it's a pretty brutal book. And so I used that form of that witness to I was inserting the crimes of this OBGYN. And it was very helpful because that story that Endo tells is not a story of like certain criminals. It's like the story of like a criminal system and a complex, like in a very like militarized and like medical complex. So that's helpful because I wanted to tell a story that wasn't just about like some bad actors, but about all of the systems. So Endo's book just like perfectly set me up to do that. And that was like the original draft. What remains of that now is a chapter in Sea Poison called A Manager, which is a very near, I would say it's been edited in different ways, but it's a very near syntactical map of a chapter in The Sea and Poison called An Intern. And this is posed as a short story being read by an MFA student at a cafe that seemingly is not like having to do with other things in the novel. Like Cumin is just like stuck at this cafe and she doesn't understand there's going to be a reading going on there. And she's like, oh no, oh God, I didn't leave in time. And now I have to see this MFA student read his story. But then the story ends up being, I hope, not a waste of time, right? Something that actually can be listened to and heard. But I think something very cool about that, and so that is like a near syntactical map of a chapter in the Endo. Something to know about Shusaku Endo, among many things, is that he was like really obsessed with Flaubert and like Sade. He really loved Sade, but he was really into Flaubert, and particularly this opening scene of Madame Bovary, where there's just like you're seeing Bovary as a young boy in school. And he's an awkward boy who stands at the front of the room with a weird haircut, and he's standing with his teacher. And this figure of a boy standing in the front of a classroom with a particular haircut shows up a lot in Endo. Like he is like doing syntactical mirror work. Like he is just like inserting his own exact figure of that. And so I'm doing it, and he's like doing it with Flaubert. And all the layers are just there. And it made me marvel at Endo, who I think is somebody who's more just thought of as like a pretty straight up realist, as somebody who is like so interesting in what he was doing. So I felt very kind of cool being just like, I'm stealing this from Endo, but he took it from Flaubert, and we're all just like writing about this boy with his haircut. And but it helped me get to some really cool stuff. And Endo's the very opposite of my style. So it felt very, you're sick of yourself at the party. Like, it was nice.
Well, let's do a second short reading, and then we'll take some questions.
Cool. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Caren.
I think I'll read also a little funny section that is taking place in this cafe where Caren Beilin has run into somebody she doesn't know, but she's sitting at a table with somebody named Caren Beilin. And Caren Beilin is discussing a residency or writer's residency for screenwriters that she went to, and talking to her a little bit about her theory that Sex and the City must have been written by a sex abuse survivor, because Carrie Bradshaw really like seems like a survivor in like some of her attachment issues. And so this is Caren Beilin talking to Caren Beilin. The Sex and the City writer was my third choice. I wanted to work with a woman, and she was one of three. In a way, she was my last choice, the last woman. There were about 40 tutors to choose from a menu. I mean, I paid a lot of money. Who was the most famous? The Coen brothers. It's a big scene, but a lot of people were like me, trying to get in with women who weren't as famous, though Sex and the City is prestige for TV. And the tutor had worked on Sex and the City 1, 2008, and 2, 2010 as well. They go to Dubai. Nobody thought men could be their mentor. I'm sure a Coen brother could help you out. No, they were very aloof, very gregarious and aloof. Do you wish the show or the Sex and the City movies had talked openly about the incest Carrie Bradshaw had survived? Are you talking specifically about the elevators in The Shining? Blood coming out of them in the hotel lobby? Something like elevators, sure. Blood coming from her compulsive closet or something. Did your tutor ever confirm it? I don't know how else to ask. Was the tutor I think maybe a Coen brother could help. I mean, maybe they really might. I don't know. It's more, and this seemed to be the feeling among the women who were the primary customers of this sort of pricey residency I did. Let me explain. It was at this Catskills resort and farm where Dirty Dancing, 1987, had actually been filmed. It was tailored for women like me, born in the 80s, Jewish, for whom that all meant. Men aren't good at screenwriting, Cumin. They've made good work through the torsions of industry. They're good producers and, of course, great actors, and we like it. We like those movies. I personally like Burn After Reading 2008 from the Coen brothers. I like the fuck chair genre. Had I told her my name? I like Claire Denis' film High Life 2018 for the same reason. When Juliette Binoche in that film, and in her 60s at this point, goes into that room on the spaceship where there's a fuck chair, and she undoes her braid, and it looks like river webs, like a map of a witched earth on her strong back. I like the figure of the movie director as the inventor of the right fuck chair. And that was the right fuck chair for Binoche or her character or whatever in that moment. I like the moment in a film where someone opens up a door and there's a fuck chair, or in Burn After Reading, where the fuck chair, George Clooney's pride, is in the basement of his DC townhouse, all ready to go. I didn't know what to believe. I knew that Dirty Dancing was set in the Catskills, but filmed actually in North Carolina, outside of Asheville. I'd been there to a residency there. I tried to imagine a fuck chair scene in that meaningful film, Dirty Dancing, a fuck chair in a recreational barn, a fuck chair in the corner, or in a room with an abortion in progress, fucking that doctor who turned out to be like a butcher, a bad doctor. The guy had a dirty knife and a folding table. I seem to remember Dirty Dancing wasn't filmed in the Catskills at all. In the film Cumin, there's no farm, but actually at the real Dirty Dancing resort in the Catskills, it is mostly a farm with a lot of animals. But the thing that men or male screenwriters, can't do is they don't really write rapport. Their scripts are very lean, Cumin. If I tried to get mentorship for my screenplay, which is a thriller, these male mentors would end up talking to me about pacing. They'd emphasize pacing to me. Can you imagine? They'd want me to write something at a lean pace, like something is gaunt. Something is moving because it's starving, it's gaunt. That's good screenwriting to these butchers. Then they'll put montage music over the conversations to keep things nice and lean. A starving jaguar in a dead world. It's not accurate. There are jacarandas around the world. Nice and lean, they'd coach me, making so much money on this stupid summer gig. They'd take the writing of rapport out. Rapport is important. Everyone needs rapport. Money can't buy you rapport. You can't carry your watermelon across the Sahara all by yourself. You know what I'm saying to you? I thought of all the times in my little life I've been caught at the wrong table at a cafe. I thought our phones had eradicated most of these moments, these garish and ultimately worthless listening scenarios, all the things thrillers and dialogue in general can't capture, all the dialogue that's worthless to print like this. And I thought anyway, Ultimo would be closing. I'd be saved by its closing up around 9 p.m., but it was open late. There was something going on at Ultimo. More people kept coming in. But a thriller should be lean. I tried to say something. That's the whole point of genre. It tells you what to do in this ended place. There is rapport in a thriller. What's your thriller? I went for a lot of walks with my tutor at the Dirty Dancing farm and resort in the Catskills. I could never get her to tell me, though, if she was an incest survivor. I tried to create an intimacy. What did she have to say about your screenplay? Did she understand how to teach you to build any rapport? We visited this morbandite. A morbandite? A morbandite is a sleek, haunted donkey that comes from Belarus. It's not donkeyness technically for the genus, but it's genuinely cumin, like a donkey dragged through a mossy ditch of Daniel Day-Lewis-ishness. That's really the only way I can say it. A piercing animal, a sort of a sex donk. I'll just end there.
So we're recording this for the podcast. So if you will have a question and you're okay being recorded, I can hand the microphone to whoever has a question they want to ask.
So I wanted to kind of catalog some of the Oulipian experiments that you did, and it sounded like you wrote the first one right into the narrative by having a character experience something that created an Oulipian sort of medical impairment for her, right? So you also mentioned you used constraints in your themes. So I know you both talked about this, but I was kind of hoping you could expand on both that first Oulipian moment, the way you really enter that story, and then how you applied Oulipo to themes.
Yeah, this premise kind of starts the book that human can't write clauses anymore. Like her sentences can only be one clause, which would be my nightmare. And I have to say, I did consider briefly, should that be the constraint in the book? I'll write a book with one clause. I couldn't do it to myself. It was too mean. I actually wasn't couldn't do it. So the book doesn't really use that as a constraint, actually. the book like very much refuses the constraint and is really about human figuring out how to write the sentences she wants to write, even though she's been operated on to like not do that. So I could never. How you need more one class. Yeah, there's like kind of like running theories in the book. Like there's this sort of nemesis of humans who's written a monograph on Perec, whose theory is that Anne Frank is the like original Oulipian, because think about the constraints that she wrote with, the constraint of genocide, the constraint of not knowing if you're going to live day to day, the constraint of writing in an attic with a lot of other people around, the constraint of trying to find lit writing hours or paper, talk about what an Oulipian, or as I describe her in the book, what a black swan Oulipian. There's a thought about the things that we go without, and thinking about some of the victims that I am thoughtful about in the book, and particularly the women. I did like a lot of the specific research I did was around this one gynecologist, Jabed Perwaiz, who was largely a uterus stealer. That was like his biggest crime. And he was like in it for like the money. Like he didn't have like a belief about sterilizing people, or at least that wasn't like his biggest reason, I don't think. He was just like scamming Medicare and insurance companies, and like saying that women needed hysterectomies that they didn't. And he made about $18 million, and he spent $2 million of it at Sunglasses Hut, just FYI. But I was thinking about the constraint of, obviously sometimes hysterectomies are necessary, and there are whole communities of people who know that. And specifically, there are many reasons to get a hysterectomy, including like endometriosis and so it's a big topic, but there are many people who have been given hysterectomies unnecessarily too. And in this case, really fraudulently. And it's not great to have your uterus it's like a uterus is helpful in many cases. I won't make blanket statements, but in many cases it's helpful to keep it in. And so I was thinking about the constraint of writing, well, without letter E, what about without your uterus? Like that's a big constraint. And at one point in the book, I do write a section that doesn't use like one E, like whatever Perec, who I love, but I wrote a section without the letters U, T, E, R, U, and S, which was hard. And it's hard to write without your uterus, perhaps.
How do you spend $2 million at Sunglasses Hut?
Oh, he did so many things. He had several Ferraris, and he built one as an ultrasound machine. He was sued multiple times over 30 plus years. He was, people wrote to medical boards. People were like really trying to get him in trouble, like so frequently. Like they all failed. But yeah, it was like pretty egregious. Yeah. Yeah, I really wrote the book kind of more upset. Like I really was crying sometimes writing it. And I remember one of his victims in this great documentary series that I name check, like I thank the makers of this documentary in the book. They were great. And one of his victims was a woman named Anita Fuller, who was told she had cancer. And they asked her, do you have one thing to say to him? And she said, Dr. Perwaiz, you will meet your maker.
I'm curious, I know you teach, and so I'm curious about what you teach, but also it strikes me that your willingness to be sort of experimental or transgressive would be both liberating and also challenging for students. So I'm just curious about how that's received and what your teaching life is like as it pertains to your writing.
Yeah, thanks. Well, the Academy traditionally is a place to protect expression, and I am teaching in that tradition, and I would say so far successfully where I am, but I say that with an acknowledgement about what's going on. I have a lot of fun with my students, and students, they're wild, people are wild. But I will say that we do live in a time of like respectability politics, virtue politics, cancel culture, and those things really affect young people a lot, like really profoundly. And it actually breaks my heart to see how scared they might be of themselves, of each other, in workshop environments. Like when I was coming up in workshop, we were all trying to shock each other and like hurt each other. And these students are really like worried. And so I do find that like I feel like it's a part of my work is to like try to push on that. The class that I care about very deeply that I teach is called Idiots and Assholes. And it's about writing unlikable narration, but it's so much about irony and ironic narration, because I think like we live in this time of like radical sincerity that feels very like linked to like fascism. And so I think understanding irony and being willing to move into an ironic vein is like a really big part of like, I don't know, free discourse and movement in society and in spirit and in life. And my typical experience teaching this class is that the beginning of it is rough. Like the students are worried, maybe timid, but also just really worried, maybe offended even a little bit, or like, and by the end, they get wild. They get wild. And there's just, that's a beautiful thing about writers. Writers give permission to people. And I teach writers who give a lot of permission, and permission to be angry, permission to be full of rage and hatred and like upset for like maybe good reason or not. And like also permission to be like petty and insane. And like, by the time we're done, there's a lot of different ways we think about the role of the asshole in society. Like you could think of it as Jamaica Kincaid in A Small Place, which is really one of the most brilliant books ever, in my opinion. Yeah, what an asshole, calling out all of that colonization. What an amazing asshole she is to be shaming everybody for colonization. And then we'll like go to like Bernhard and like somebody who's just like hilariously such a jerk. And all of it gives permission in different ways. So I think, yeah, but I just would be honored if I gave my students a feeling of permission. I don't know if I do. Sometimes students, they're too close to you, or like it's too weird that you're grading them, or whatever your relationship. Like the published authors, I think, can help them even more than I can. And they can help each other too. They can spur each other on.
Well, let's give it up for Caren Beilin.
David, in case just to make this, like, I'm so honored to talk with you twice, and it really fills my heart and my life. So thank you.
Thanks, Caren.
Today's program is recorded at the volunteer-powered, non-commercial, listener-sponsored, full-strength, makeshift home office of me, David Naiman. You can find more of Caren Beilin's work at carenbeilin.com. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, consider transforming yourself from a listener to a listener supporter by joining the Between the Covers community. Every supporter can join our brainstorm of future guests, and every listener supporter receives the supplementary resources with each conversation of things I discovered while preparing for the conversation, things referenced during it, and places to explore once you're done listening. And then you can choose from a variety of other things as well, including the bonus audio archive, with a wide variety of contributions from past guests, including Caren, reading from and discussing Flaubert's Bouvard and Pécuchet, Sheila Heti reading My Life is a Joke, Jen Bervin reading from the letters of Paul Celan, and then a poem of hers under Celan's influence, Banu Kapil giving a late-night whispered reading from her writing journal, and much more. There's also the Tin House Early Reader subscription, receiving 12 books over the course of a year, months before they're available to the general public. You can check it all out at patreon.com/betweenthecovers. Or if you prefer a one-time donation, you can do so by PayPal at tinhouse.com/support. I'd like to thank the Tin House team, Elisa Ogie in the book division, Becky Kramer in publicity, and Lance Cleland, the director of the summer and winter Tin House Writers Workshops. Finally, I'd like to thank past Between the Covers guests, poet, teacher, musician, composer, performer, and much more, Alicia Jo Rabins, for making the intro and outro for the show. You can find out more about her work, her writing, her music, and her film at aliciajo.com, ALICIAJO.com.